Good news for Canadian canola producers. China has reinstated access to its market for two major players in Canadian agri-food that had been prevented from shipping canola seed to the Chinese market. So this dispute apparently over after 3 years.
Canada has opened a door that many thought would stay closed for a long time. This is a huge win for Canadian farmers, but it could leave American exporters struggling to keep their place in a market they cannot afford to lose. Canada and China reached a trade agreement that dramatically cut Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola seed from approximately 84% to 15% and reinstated access to one of the largest vegetable oil import markets in the world. That reduction is not a rounding error. It is the difference between Canadian canola being commercially competitive in China and being effectively locked out of the market. For nearly 2 years before that agreement, Canadian canola exporters watched their largest single buyer disappear behind an 84% tariff wall. The agreement reversed that in a single announcement. And the implications for American agricultural exporters competing for the same Chinese import budget are now being closely tracked by farm analysts across the US Midwest. Canola is Canada's most valuable crop by export revenue. Canada is the world's largest exporter of canola seed, canola oil, and canola meal, producing between 18 and 20 million tons of canola seed annually from farms concentrated in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and British Columbia. China historically absorbed between 4 and 5 million tons of Canadian canola seed per year, making it Canada's single largest canola export destination by volume. When China imposed the 84% tariff in September 2024, retaliating against Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles and 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum, Canadian canola exporters lost a customer representing billions of dollars in annual agricultural trade revenue with essentially no warning. The sequence of events that produced the January 2026 agreement began with Prime Minister Mark Carney's trade mission to China, one of the most strategically significant diplomatic visits a Canadian Prime Minister has undertaken in decades, given the deterioration in Canada-China relations that had accelerated since 2018. The Canola Council of Canada's response to the agreement was documented immediately. The industry welcomed the significant progress on Chinese tariffs, describing it as a breakthrough that restores access to a market Canada spent years developing and lost in a matter of weeks. Manitoba canola producers, whose members had spent nearly 2 years selling into a Chinese market effectively closed to their crop, described optimism about the deal's implications for farm income and export volumes. DTN Progressive Farmers' deeper analysis of the agreement in January 2026 covered the commercial mechanics of how the tariff reduction would operate in practice. The 84% to 15% reduction does not immediately guarantee that China resumes purchasing Canadian canola at pre-dispute volumes, buying patterns. Domestic Chinese crushing capacity utilization and competing supply from Australia and Ukraine all influence how quickly Chinese importers shift their purchasing back toward Canadian origin. But 15% is a commercially workable rate. Australian canola entering China faces its own tariff structure. Ukrainian supply faces logistical and quality variability driven by ongoing conflict. At 15%, Canadian canola is priced competitively against both alternatives at current market conditions, which means the commercial volume recovery depends primarily on how quickly Chinese crushers and trading companies re-establish procurement relationships with Canadian exporters. The American agricultural dimension of this story runs through soybeans rather than canola directly, but the connection is straightforward once the Chinese import market mechanics are understood. China imports approximately 60 million tons of soybeans annually, making it by far the world's largest soybean importer. The United States and Brazil are the two primary suppliers. American soybean exports to China have been subject to repeated disruption during trade conflicts and have been used as leverage by Beijing in bilateral negotiations with Washington since the first Trump trade war in 2018. The Investigate Midwest reporting from July 1st, 2026 confirmed that China had resumed US soybean purchases under a new trade deal with Trump, but characterized the future for American soybean farmers as remaining daunting, reflecting the persistent uncertainty about whether those purchases would be sustained or disrupted again in a subsequent negotiation cycle. The competition dynamic between Canadian canola and American soybeans in the Chinese market is real and documented, but it operates at different product levels. China uses canola oil primarily for human consumption in cooking applications, where it is preferred for its mild flavor and high smoke point. China uses soybean oil and soybean meal primarily for industrial food processing and animal feed. The two crops serve overlapping but not identical end uses in the Chinese food system, meaning that a recovery in Chinese canola purchases from Canada does not directly subtract from Chinese soybean purchases from the United States on a one-for-one basis. What it does is compete for the overall Chinese agricultural import budget and for the share of Chinese crushing capacity not already committed to soybeans. When Canadian canola is competitively priced at a 15% tariff, Chinese crushers that might otherwise have purchased soybeans to extract oil and meal have an incentive to allocate a greater share of their capacity to canola crushing, which produces both canola oil for direct consumer use and canola meal for animal feed. Saskatchewan accounted for approximately 60% of Canadian canola production in 2024. The province's canola farmers had spent the preceding 16 months selling into a market constrained by the absence of Chinese demand shipping to Japan, Pakistan, the European Union, and the United Arab Emirates in volumes that partially but not fully compensated for the Chinese market's closure. The canola industry's ability to redirect exports was real but incomplete. Japan and the EU have their own supply relationships and import capacity constraints. The alternative markets absorb some volume at reduced prices. The January 2026 agreement's significance is that it restores the original largest buyer without requiring Canadian exporters to permanently accept the lower pricing that alternative markets had been offering during the LACE period of Chinese market closure. The agreement reached today, with a tariff reduction from 84% to 15% on canola seed, is significant progress for the canola industry and addresses a key source of market disruption for Canadian canola farmers. The Canola Council of Canada stated in its official response to the agreement, "The broader agricultural trade context within which the Canada-China canola agreement operates reflects the same fundamental dynamic driving Canada's diversification across every sector of its economy simultaneously." Approximately 75% of Canadian agricultural exports historically went to the United States and a concentrated group of major buyers. The disruption of the Chinese canola market in September 2024 and its restoration in January 2026 demonstrated in the most direct possible way how quickly a major market can close and how economically damaging that closure is for farmers whose production cycles, storage infrastructure, and marketing plans are built around known export destinations. The January 2026 agreement restores one major market. The United States' 25% CUSMA non-compliant tariff on Canadian agricultural products remains in force, creating ongoing disruption in the other major directions simultaneously. The Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan described the canola agreement as one key piece of a challenging trade environment, acknowledging that the Chinese tariff reduction, while significant, exists alongside continued American tariff pressure on Canadian agricultural goods. That dual exposure Chinese market restored, American market disrupted, describes the commercial environment. Canadian canola farmers and broader agricultural sector are navigating as Canada's trade relationships with both its largest historical customer and its largest potential alternate customer undergo simultaneous structural change. China's January 2026 resumption of Canadian canola purchasing at the reduced tariff rate is documented in the trade data that began flowing through Canadian port terminals in the weeks following the agreement. Shipments from the Port of Vancouver and Prince Rupert to Chinese destinations increased measurably in February and March. 2026, as Chinese crushers restored procurement relationships with Canadian exporters, the volumes are not yet at the pre-dispute peak levels that characterize Canada-China canola trade before September 2024. Full restoration of those volumes will take additional months as commercial relationships, logistics contracts, and purchasing programs are rebuilt from the disrupted state the 84% tariff period created.